Good morning, Wabash. Today, speaking at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Derek Nelson with his talk entitled, What I Have Learned from Freshmen. Derek Nelson is a professor of religion at Wabash and Stephen S. Bowen Professor of the Liberal Arts. He was raised on a farm on the banks of the mighty Mississippi in Minnesota. He graduated from Wabash College in 1999 and then earned degrees from Yale University and the University of California, Berkeley. At both of the latter schools, he believes he was the only student who owned and drove a pickup truck. He is a student of the Protestant Reformation, the philosophy of religion, the Oxford comma, and the art of smoking meat. He is married to Reverend Kelly Nelson, and they are proud parents of 5-year-old Madeline, who knows the first verse, refrain, and chorus of Old Wabash. Not usually known for his fashion sense, Dr. Nelson is wearing black today in support of the World Council of Churches initiative, Thursdays in Black, a movement for the end of rape and violence. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nelson.
Well, many thanks to all of you for coming this morning, and thanks especially to the Sphinx Club for the invitation and for the welcome and for the donuts. I haven't been at chapel much recently. I used to really enjoy coming, but then for some reason you guys started having the Ryans yell at us in the mall, which I didn't like, so I stopped coming. There actually are lots of us like that, by the way, just a thought. I have a point to make today, but truth be told, I don't actually know what it is. Mostly I want to tell you 3 stories about freshmen that I've known and the freshman that I was, and perhaps that's what the point is. The truth comes out in the telling of the right stories. I hope that's what happens here in our midst today, as you listen and as you perhaps weave this in with your own story, the story that you are. First, I want to tell you about my friend Gianu Lamachani. Gianu was a pre-med chem major, as I was at the time, who had been at Wabash a week longer than I had because he had come here from Nepal. I thought that I wanted to go into medicine. They say you do what you know. Well, what I knew was that my mom was a nurse and my dad was a carpenter. I'm pragmatically minded. My dad built a barn one winter in Minnesota where I grew up. When putting the metal roof on, he continually reached into his nailing apron, pulled out a nail between thumb and forefinger, pressed it into the cold metal of the roof, and hammered it home. When he came home that night, he watched as his thumb and forefinger slowly turned charcoal black from frostbite. So I thought, maybe medicine, not construction. That's honestly about how shallow it was. I liked science, figured it was an honorable and employable profession, so why not? Gianu was different. I see Dr. Phillips in the back. He knows this is true. He was different. There was something about his drive that both shamed me in my pragmatism and comfort, but also inspired me to be like him. One day in Goodrich Hall with our friend TJ, he told me that he was at Wabash because he wanted to cure tuberculosis. Oh, is that all? Yes, he said, and not the easy kind. I mean the drug-resistant kind. Okay. To give you a sense of the scope of this, consider that last year 1.3 million people died from tuberculosis. Gianu came from a little town called Narayangad in Nepal, where he knew everyone. His dad was a tailor. His world was almost equally split among family, school, and the tailor shop. There were no vacations. If he wasn't in school, he did odd jobs in his dad's shop full time. Even as early as 10 years old, he would stay there until late at night. He went to a special school for high-achieving kids in the capital, several hours away. But when he was in the 11th grade, he was called back home from school. His grandfather became very sick and was given a diagnosis of drug-resistant tuberculosis. He didn't want to go to any doctors, and he hated hospitals. What he wanted was a male member of his family to take care of him, as he was almost bedridden. So it was either Gianu or his dad. If his dad left work, there'd be no income. He hated to do it, but he asked Gianu to leave school to attend to him. When he coughed, which was very often, it was heavy and full of blood. Eventually, he died. That was the first death that Gianu had witnessed. At the time, he was 17. Of course, he had heard of death in his town. He knew of it as a hypothetical. But it reminds me of, I think it's in C.S. Lewis, who learned the syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Lewis said, that struck me as being certainly true, but for Socrates, not for me. Within a few hours of his grandfather's death, Gianu and his family took the body to the banks of a local river and cremated him. That night, he said, the house was just as it was before, but so totally silent. He slept in the room where his grandfather used to sleep. Everything was intact, just that he was gone. His clothes were there. The bed was there. Even his medications were there. It took a week for it to sink in that he was not going to come back. Gianu went back to school and started to read about drug-resistant TB. Then he went to see some doctors to discuss it. They told him drug-resistant TB meant there were no cures. For some reason, this made Gianu furious. Here was a 17-year-old kid who didn't know what he wanted to do, didn't really feel strongly about much of anything. He did study hard, but not for any particular reason, just because his father said that was the way to success. But slowly his interest in sports and other extracurricular activities waned. He read more and more about tuberculosis. He learned it was caused by bacteria, so he read about bacteria. At some point, Gianu realized that his animating desire was to take revenge for his grandfather's death. This was somehow personal, and he made the decision to go wherever necessary to do just that. I'll never forget the Chuck Norris-like look that glinted across Gianu's face as he told me that. Normally, he was the calmest, most relaxed fellow around, but he would have his revenge if it took his whole life. Quite by luck, a woman came to his high school from the U.S. Education Foundation and helped some students take the TOEFL, test of English as a foreign language, and SAT to apply for colleges abroad. Wabash accepted him and somehow made it feasible for him to come. Gianu told me he still remembers the phone call to his dad's shop from his school saying there was a package from Wabash College to him sent via DHL. It was large, and it must mean that there's something important. The next day, he took a bus 6 hours each way to go pick up the mail from his school. The packet confirmed it. He had been accepted. Gianu figured out how to get a passport and applied for a U.S. student visa. Instead of the usual interview at the consulate's office, the officer simply congratulated him and said he knew one of his friend's cousins had attended Wabash, and he said it's a great school and you'll love it. The Wabash Mafia extends to the Himalayas, evidently. Over 100 people from Gianu's town came to the Kathmandu airport to see him off. Dozens climbed onto the roof of the terminal to wave goodbye. This was Gianu's first time on an airplane. He landed eventually in Los Angeles. He was pretty disoriented, and he asked a clerk where he should go. He was told to take Shuttle A from the ground floor to the domestic terminal. Gianu's English was really good, but shuttle to him meant space rocket. He was petrified, asked the clerk to repeat her instructions, and stood there shocked. He wanted to go to Wabash. Why are they sending me in a shuttle? He associated America with military might and a space program. He wondered, where actually is Crawfordsville? At that moment, all he wanted was to get to Wabash and call his parents and tell them that he had indeed reached the college and that, yes, Wabash is truly there as an actual thing. So he stood paralyzed in fear and confusion. After some time, he walked outside with a crowd. Within a few minutes, a gigantic white bus with Shuttle A written in large blue letters stopped where they were standing, and he got in. He was momentarily relieved, but then was shocked again. The bus was driven by a woman. He had never seen a woman driver before in his life. He flew to Dayton, then to Indy. A young man named Greg was there to pick him up. His luggage never arrived, so they rode in Greg's car to Crawfordsville. Gianu had never seen a 4-lane highway before. In Nepal, the longest stretch of road that is straight and flat is between Kathmandu and Gianu's hometown of Narayangad. It's less than 100 meters long. Interstate 74 was like heaven for Gianu. He couldn't see the end of the road. It was flat. He didn't even have to change gears. Amazing. He finally reached Martindale Hall. His life and its future possibilities had changed completely in these 2 days. Everything was different, like food. Every day of his life, more or less, he'd eaten rice, lentil soup, and a curry. Now it was Sparks. He loved it. I remember taking him to Long John Silver's for some reason, and he loved that too. The dean's office sent Gianu to Walmart with a driver and $150 for replacement clothes. In the socks section, the driver said, "Here's a 12-pack, but I think you should get 2 12-packs. Confused, Gianu told him that he already had a pair of socks, that he was wearing. At night, he could wash this pair and dry it in the sun the next day and wear the other pair while those dried and then rotate. Who would need more than 2 pairs of socks?" He told me, "We just stood there in the aisle, shocked at each other. He ended up buying me 1 whole dozen, but I used 4 and kept the rest for my family." Our friend TJ, whom I mentioned, was Gianu's roommate. He was far from home too. Gianu was scandalized when both TJ and their other roommate, Andrew, had their own CD players, and one of them bought a refrigerator. Scandal turned to humor as Gianu overheard TJ talking to his mom in Oregon, saying, "It's so different here in Indiana. It's hot every day, and they call soda pop." It's weird. Finally, classes started. Gianu studied chemistry and calculus. He sat near me in both classes. He petitioned for special permission to take genetics, even though he hadn't yet had introductory biology. In his written rationale for why he should be allowed to take the course, he said, and I quote, "Genetics is one of the tools by which I will have my revenge." It's a good line, but unfortunately he omitted the context for this statement, and his petition was denied. Eventually, of course, he took the class. He excelled in all of his science classes. But the most cherished learning came as a total surprise. Sophomore year, his advisor told him, "You better get these humanities courses out of the way." TJ told him that he was going to stand in line at the registration the next day to try to get into Phil 5, taught by Bill Plaker. Gianu trusted TJ's judgment, any sane person would, and went along. He wasn't expecting much, but stood completely mesmerized the whole hour and a half the first class. After that, he attended every class and every talk or event that Plaker held. He said that his science professors gave him extraordinary knowledge, but it was really Plaker from whom he learned to seek knowledge. The rest of the story can be told quickly. After Wabash, Gianu joined a lab at Johns Hopkins University whose singular focus was to understand the pathogen that causes TB. That was 1999. Since then, he has, with a laser focus, attempted to understand this pathogen so that it can be destroyed when it's in our bodies. He earned an MD, then a PhD. He joined the faculty of that medical school while still in his 20s. I say it's a little bit of justice that things have gone so well for him. He says he's just lucky and that he has an unfair advantage over others because he has a reason that gives him energy for working on something that doesn't feel like work. Recently, the National Institutes of Health gave Gianu a prize, not a grant, although they give him those too, of $1.5 million as the New Innovator Award. He mentors dozens of graduate students. He recently made a huge discovery when he found an enzyme that at certain levels drastically weakens the cell wall of the TB bacterium, causing it to lose its ability to spread disease in its host. You have not heard the last of Gianu Lamachani. What did I learn from this Wabash freshman? I learned that I was a little bit ashamed of my comfortable life, that my motives should be better, my goals should be higher, my spirit should be stronger, and that if I spent 1% more of my time thinking about what the world needed rather than what I wanted, I'd be 100% closer to a world that I wanted to be in. But I also learned that you can't stop at feeling guilty or ashamed. You have to move to something else. So if you've had a little bit of comfort in your life, if you've had a couple breaks, I'm speaking to you right here. Don't spend much time feeling bad about that. Just try to get some of that for others. I'll tell two more stories, but not nearly as in-depth as Gianu's, rest assured. The second freshman was my friend Ashraf Haidari. Ashraf and I worked in the dean's office together. The dean was an absolutely great guy, and his name was Donald Herring, but he went by Don, and his first name was actually Peter, I think. So he signed letters as Pete on Herring, which I thought was absolutely hysterical. Ashraf was from Afghanistan and did not think it was funny. He was 2 weeks late to his freshman year, which made everyone in the dean's office extremely nervous. When he finally arrived, we rejoiced. He had been living in a refugee camp because the Taliban had bombed the town where he grew up. In fact, he was held at gunpoint by the Taliban as a teenager. Ashraf was a bit older than other freshmen, but only by a couple years. We talked often. And I have tried to remember accurately those conversations. Imagine my surprise when he was telling me about his life in the refugee camp. He spoke of some dental procedures that he had done. Wait, you're a dentist? Well, not really, but sort of. What does that mean? This was amazing to me. I think basically he had read up a bit on this and was willing to give it a try in a place of dire need. At that time, his English was still a bit broken, but he quickly and fluently described maxillofacial reconstructive efforts. He had trouble learning English because the school he went to as he grew up kept switching from Russian to English and back again as their required foreign language based on who they expected might be attacking next. After Wabash, where he majored in political science, Ashraf went to Washington, D.C. He got a master's degree in security studies at Georgetown. He knew he wanted to make a global impact in the cause of peace and the healing of nations. He expected it would take a while. The timeline shortened for him when 18 years ago yesterday, terrorists, protected by the same regime that bombed Ashraf and his family, hijacked planes across the eastern U.S. Ashraf quickly became a trusted advisor to the Afghani ambassador to the U.S. He has moved his way up the ranks and is now ambassador to Sri Lanka, a key trading partner with Afghanistan. You have not heard the last of Ashraf Haidari. What I learned from this Wabash freshman was that the education I was busy taking for granted was, in fact, the object of hungry desire from a refugee camp 10,000 miles away. The credential-seeking, punch my union card so I can get some kind of job mentality that's less common here, but still around. It just turned to sand in my mouth. I spat it out. This thing that we're doing here, reading old texts and worrying about them, and writing as clearly and persuasively as we can, the get your butt to the lab, and when you're there, do it right mentality. This is not the theater of wannabe tough guys in boot camp. This is the stuff of dreams, of the hurting people of a refugee camp. Last story. I left Wabash for seminary at Yale Divinity School. My first year there, I met a fierce and compassionate woman from Kenya named Evelyn. She had been the first or maybe second woman ordained a priest in the Anglican Church in Kenya. She was well into middle age by the time I met her, and it was clear she had seen a lot. The suffering of her area because of AIDS was awful. Worst was the effect on children. Besides those infected and dying, many were orphaned. While at Yale, Evelyn developed a dream of starting a school for them. Average public school size in Kenya at the time was about 200, probably about this many in each class. Because uniforms are more or less required and lodging isn't provided, barriers to public education are numerous and high. Evelyn's solution, Nambale Magnet School, on the border with Uganda, is amazing. Grandparents, a demographic who largely survived the HIV epidemic, work on the grounds, which includes a farm that supplies food for the school and sells surplus for cash profit. They started the kindergarten the first year, and then each year they added one more grade as the original kindergartners got older. I could go on and on about the success of this school, but I really just want to tell you one thing about Evelyn. Even though Evelyn is the spiritual mother, the actual founder, the chief fundraiser, the leader, the icon, the woman in this tiny town in rural Kenya with 2 advanced degrees from Yale University, she insists that decisions about education at the school be made by its teachers because she says she's not trained as an educator. She's a priest. This kind of blows my mind. Our Western sense of hierarchy would mean that Evelyn gives orders and employees respond. But Evelyn has worked hard to achieve a particular kind of competence, a narrow sliver of responsibility that she takes absolutely seriously, but it involves helping other people become more responsible. It reminds me of something a friend once said were the 3 main rules of management. Number 1, do your job. Number 2, don't do someone else's job. Number 3, don't let anyone else do your job. Gianu taught me that my dreams should be bigger. Ashraf taught me that my work needed to be better. And Evelyn taught me that my responsibility needed to actually be smaller. You can serve the world most faithfully by finding your own small corner of it and loving it the best you can. Now, it will not be lost on you that these 3 first-year students who taught me so much were all quite different from me, to say nothing of being different from each other. But my closing thought is that when I was a student, we were in a less ideologically driven Wabash and America. I hung out with Gianu and Ashraf because I thought they were cool, not because the college endorsed or enforced a diversity requirement. An ideology of multiculturalism tends to see reaching across the cultural divides between the US and Nepal, Afghanistan, and Kenya as something that's sort of like a duty. It's something that educated people know they're supposed to do. And maybe it is, I don't know. But I guess I'm viewing this in terms of self-interest. I can't learn from someone just like me. I can't grow without the challenges placed on me by someone who's hungrier, who's more driven, who's more animated by a vision of the future because his experience of the present hurts. Therefore, I hope you'll look around at the incoming class and find someone who has that. Ask him to tell his story. It's amazing what you can learn from a freshman. Thank you.